Generative AI is hitting the workforce hard and heavy. And so I'm creating this video specifically to help people leaders who are trying to lead through this change with their teams and figuring out what it means and how do we approach it well. At the same time, if you're not a people leader and you're on part of a team, this actually may be a good resource for you to bring to your leader to help through this, because it can be very uncomfortable as a team member going, there's all these changes happening and I don't know what's going on and I may not feel like my leader's driving this in a way that's productive. So you actually can be part of that change instead of critiquing it from the side. But before we get into this, if you like this content, I would encourage you to subscribe to this as I continue living life at the intersection of people, technology, and business. Hopefully you find these resources helpful. So let's get into this, because it's really important to answer the question, why does this matter? If you listen to conversations right now, they're all over the map, and you'll hear everything from the apocalypse is upon us to, this is no big deal, let's just avoid the whole thing. And I think there's a healthy middle in between there. But the reality is generative AI and advanced AI, it's here. It's not this futuristic thing down the road we need to consider. It's here, and it's only going to advance more. So we can ignore it, but that would be at our peril. And the reality is, while some people are looking at this, they may go, well, this isn't really ever going to affect my job. But the reality is it's going to affect, from my perspective, literally every job that exists. Now, it may affect them in different ways. There's certainly jobs that are more vulnerable to advanced AI than others. But in some ways, advanced AI is affecting jobs as it stands now. Even frontline jobs are being affected by the way automation is happening, the way their jobs are changing, the way they're communicating with others. So to say, I don't think this is going to affect me, or that's only for knowledge desk worker type things, it would be a big mistake, because the reality is generative AI is going to start tapping its way into so many different things. You may not even be aware that it's happening. So just to give an example of this, there's a lot of companies right now looking at how can generative AI assess capability of employees in the workforce, things like that. You may not even know that's going on in your organization behind the scenes, but generative AI is in fact impacting how decisions are made about your work, how decisions are made around the workforce, the strategies, things like that. So the reality is, to say, I don't think I need to concern myself with this would be a big mistake. But if you're on a team, this is actually a really unique opportunity for you to reevaluate how your team operates and actually improve it, and improve it for the better. I mean, the reality is it's going to affect things. So the question is, are you going to allow it to change things for the better? Or are you just going to let it kind of happen, which then it's a crapshoot, whether it's going to improve things or make things worse. So this is a really important topic, and I'm not talking about this simply because it's a popular thing that's happening right now. Given my whole career in focusing on human performance and human development, really right now, this technology is just one of the biggest things that's affecting that right now. And I think we're at this precipice of a decision on where is this going to go? And we have far more power in where it goes than we may realize. So if you're leading a team, this is an opportunity for you to step up and say, okay, so how do I navigate this well with my team so that they're not afraid and I'm clear on what's going on and I make smart decisions around it? And I think what you're going to find, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, but I'm not super technical, or this isn't my sweet spot, I think what you're going to find is, like many things as it relates to technology, knowing how to navigate is less about knowing the technology and more about knowing the core of how to lead well and how to run things well. So I think as I get into this, you're going to find this video is not going to be, here are all the tactical things that you can consider within your team, but more, here is a sustainable process and way of looking at things that you can do with your team to actually figure that out together. Because the reality is there's no YouTube video that you're going to watch, or no content out there that you can watch prescriptively that's going to tell you, follow these keen steps and you'll get your tech stack right, nor would you want it to. So let me jump to the first piece that has absolutely nothing to do with the technology. And that is, if you're a team leader right now, kind of trying to evaluate how is this technology going to impact things, one of the first things you need to do is make sure that your vision of what your team is to the organization is clear. And there's a lot of times we assume that it's clear because maybe it's clear in our heads, or maybe it's not even really all that clear in our heads. We just think it is. But whenever there is any sort of large scale transformation, which that is what advanced AI is going to do, this is not going to be some minor thing. Whenever you have one of those major transformations, what you need to align on first is, what is the vision of where we're going? And you need to do that with a degree of refinement to make sure it's actually clear, not only to you, but to all of your team. There's really two reasons why it's so important is, first of all, one, whenever there's major transformation, this starts striking at the hearts of people's identity, their perceived value, all sorts of things. And inevitably, when there's transformation, things also get really, really tough. So when you start digging into this and you have a unified vision that's clear for you and your teams, there's an opportunity to unite around that, so that when you're in the thick of things and things are not going well, or there's dissension in the ranks, you can come back to this unifying piece of, hey, let's just remind, and I can tell you from experience, there have been many times I've gone through this where it's chaos, and that unified vision has been what brings us back and reminds us we're all on the same team and we're going to get through this together. And I don't know what that vision is for you or your team, but it is something that you need to put the work in. The other thing that it does is, when you think about large scale transformations like this and what generative AI can do, the everything but the kitchen sink methodology can start creeping in, and scope creep can just get out of hand, and you have no filter. You have no filter to say, does this actually tie to the vision we're trying to create, or does it not? And this is going to be a great way to help you prioritize, okay, if this is where we're going directionally, is this transformation work that's causing all this disruption? Not only can we unite around, okay, we're going this way, but also, is this adding to that vision, or is this taking away, or is this a distraction to that? And this is going to help you. It's almost more important to figure out what things you shouldn't be focused on sometimes than it is the things you should be focused on. And getting clear on that vision is a key way to go about that. Now, the other thing that is really helpful for this is, it is going to help you define your team's purpose to the organization. And I think this is one of the most important aspects when you start thinking about advanced AI and its impact on your team, because this is the question that leaders are asking right now: is this team adding value? Is this team adding value? Is this role important to the organization? And if you aren't clear on that with your team, and your team is in a state of ambiguity in terms of how do you meet the needs of the organization and your company's goals, this is not an area you want to be unclear on, as the perception that advanced technology can do the work of people. You don't want to be in a place where, like, well, can it do the work of that team? Well, I don't really know, because I don't really know what that team does or what value they're adding. Or I think I know what that team does, and quite frankly, I think that could be done by a machine. Well, if that's not clear, this is the opportunity to clarify. And I would almost say this is one of the most critical steps as you start looking at it. And this is something you should be doing anyway. But I think with what has hit us in early 2023, it is more important than ever as a people leader to be saying, do I need to redefine this purpose? Is the purpose clear? Is it clear to me? Is it clear to my team? Is it clear to my stakeholders, to my leaders? And are there things we want to change about it? And some of those changes may come as you start to discover how this is impacting your organization. But they're difficult questions to ask, but they're important ones to ask. And you need to go through the work of refining this. And yeah, there's more that I could say on this, but I think you get the point that being clear on what your vision is paramount as you start stepping into what is likely one of the greatest transformations you will have experienced in your career. From here, if we transition onto this, hopefully as a people leader, this is something that is already in place, but I've been around the block long enough to know that unfortunately this is an area that is often overlooked. And that is actually making sure you know your people on your team? Who are you surrounded by in your organization? And when I say you know them, I don't mean casually, yeah, I know who they are. They do this, they're this job title on the team. I mean, actually getting to know them on a personal level, because no matter how much work gets automated, at the end of the day, even things that are automated are still someone's behind the scenes making decisions and doing work that's contributing to that automation. And understanding who those people are, where their value lies, what they really enjoy doing, what they don't enjoy doing, that's a really important piece. So some of this is twofold. So some of it is this: you're going to be starting to reconstruct and deconstruct work, which I'm going to get to in a minute. You're going to need to be doing that, which means you're going to start to need to look at who is on the team and what roles can they play in this and where do they play along this. But it's more than just the tactical, what can they do? It's also who are they as an individual? And that's a really important piece, because a lot of times in work, we don't think about people holistically. We just think about them as tools or widgets in the machine. And at the end of the day, these are humans and individuals on the other side. And so understanding even their why, their purpose, what drives them is really important, because the reality is, while we'd like to think people aren't influenced by those factors and by the things outside of work, they are. And ignoring that is a foolish mistake. And that was one of the things I learned early in my career, was how important it is to get to know people on a personal level. And there's obvious boundaries that, hopefully, if you don't know what those boundaries are, well, this isn't the video for that. But I think it's important to know that it is okay, and it's important to understand what's going on behind the scenes and what other aspects of their life are influencing the work. Because again, going through a major scale transformation like this, all those things are going to be, the volume's going to be turned up to 11, and it's going to be affecting the dynamics of the teams. It's going to be affecting where you potentially see positioning them as things move forward. But the other thing you have to consider, and I will just call this out as a people leader, everyone has a tendency to build their identity on their work. And what's interesting about this is, a lot of times they even build their identity on the work that they hate. I've experienced this personally with my teams over the years, and with a lot of the teams that I've worked with, where no matter how much somebody maybe hates the task that they do, if you try and take that away from them, or you try and suggest a different way of doing it, there is a part of them that feels as though you're actually making a value statement about them. And so understanding the way they operate and the way they work is going to help you make that transition more smoothly. Because advanced AI, there are going to be parts of people's work that are going to go away. And you have to recognize, to the surface, to you, you may look at that and go, well, great, you don't like doing that anyway, and this is going to make it faster, better, easier type of a thing. But you may not realize inherently that you're communicating a message to that person that this part of your work is not valuable, or this part of you is not valuable to me or the organization. And you have to just walk that line very carefully, because if you don't, you run the very real risk of isolating your team and eroding some of the trust that is required to do this work well. So take the time, if you are not already, getting to know your teams, getting to know what they like, what they don't like, what factors are going on in their lives, and things like that, so that you can understand who you're working with. Because the biggest thing with this, and this is something that I would encourage, regardless of the topic, for every people leader, you should not be doing this alone. And I think this is one of the paths that many people leaders go down that leaves them feeling very lonely and isolated, is they're trying to figure everything out in isolation, rather than bringing their teams in and leaning on their teams for what they can contribute to that dialogue. And inherently, not only does it leave you miserable, but you're also sucking the life out of your teams when you do this. On the surface, it seems great. And I've been guilty of this in the past. Oh, I'm trying to protect them, or I'm trying to take care of this for them, unknowingly sapping them of their engagement and their ability to feel like they're contributing and adding value. So the way you get around that is to actually get to know them and spend time getting to know them intentionally. Now, all of these things, while I'm saying them in an order, is not necessarily you have to get everything done first and then you move to step 2, then to step 3. I think there is a natural order that comes in play, but I think these first 2 are really critical to get done before you start moving to step 3. Because if you don't have the knowledge and the awareness of your team, if you're not clear on the vision of where you are and what your role and your team's role is in the organization, jumping to step 3, which is deconstructing and reconstructing the work in your team, is going to become exponentially harder for you. And so the first piece of that is going back to what I said before. If you're not clear on the vision and you start deconstructing and trying to reconstruct work, but you're not clear directionally where you're going, you're literally rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. And it's just not a good use of anyone's time or resources. So I think that's a really important piece, because going back to, you need to be saying no to things as much as you're saying yes to things. And the only way you do that is you know where you're going. But the other thing is what I said earlier about how important it is to invite people into that dialogue, invite your team members into this conversation. People don't embark on this conversation if there's no trust. They just don't. And I think that's a really, really important piece to call out, because if you don't have the trust, people are naturally going to be guarded and cagey about the work that is being done. And the reality is most leaders are not keenly aware of the work that's happening in their organization, which to me is a leadership issue in and of itself. I think there's opportunity, which this could be your chance, right? Use this as an opportunity to say, you know what, maybe I don't know as much about the work that's going on in the organization, and here's my chance to actually get to know it better. But what I'm telling you is, you start sniffing around and digging into this, and oh, hey, come on, team, like, tell me what you're doing. Tell me what the kind of work is happening so that we can discuss how generative AI may automate some of this. If you think that that is not going to start ringing trust alarm bells in everyone, if you haven't done these previous things first, you may need to question whether people leadership is the right space for you. Or you need to work on your self-awareness and empathy, because that is the reality of what's going on. And so building that trust is so important to do this. So I know I'm really emphasizing this, but what I've seen is I've seen teams over the years try and jump to this step. Hey, let's do process improvement. Hey, let's do process optimization. Hey, let's refine the way work gets done. And then they wonder why it doesn't work. And it's like, well, because nobody trusts you as a leader. They don't trust you enough to have the conversation and say, well, let's talk openly about what's actually happening. And let me talk openly about what I don't like, or what I think we could do differently or better, or what I think needs to go. That requires a high degree of trust that you need to build. Now, at this point, this is when you can start doing this. And I think there's 2 phases to this breakdown of work when it comes to this. Again, first thing is, make sure you're asking. Don't do this in a conference room off your assumptions of what work you think is actually happening. Actually bring your team into this conversation and discuss what is the actual work. Deeply understand what work is happening within your teams. And the first lens that I would suggest you go through, and I think this is going to help people feel more part of the change instead of being handed the changes, discuss openly what kinds of things are optimized for artificial intelligence and automation, and what things just aren't, and have open discussion around that. Now, ultimately, you're going to have to make the call on this, but there may be things that to you seem like logical things to automate or let AI take over, that if you actually understand the complexity or what's going into it, you may make a decision and go, oh yeah, no, actually, I don't think that's going to be a great place to turn the keys over to AI. And again, one of the phrases I use a lot is consider AI a really smart intern. And so that's a good lens you can look through and say, all right, let's take a look deeply at the work. What kinds of these activities are happening on the teams? What kinds of things are you spending your time doing that really a highly qualified intern could be doing, and break those things apart. Because as you start to break those things apart, it's going to help you not start optimizing or throwing AI at things that really have no purpose in having AI thrown at them. Because again, you're going to find lots of stuff and it's all going to come down to priorities. You're going to use your vision as that initial filter to say, okay, is this driving us towards that or not? But then from there, now you're actually into the work and you can start to deconstruct that work and say, what activities, and when I say deconstruct the work, I mean actually getting into the granularity with your teams of what is it, and I don't mean this like in the office, like what is it you say you do here? Like legitimately, I'm not talking ethereal, fluffy stuff. I'm saying, let's go through a day to day. How do you spend your time? And of those things, what are the kinds of things that are very administrative or robotic in nature? Things that frustrate you or make you feel like, I really don't enjoy doing this. Now, again, recognize if you haven't done these previous things, even those things they hate that they would gladly in their head hand over to someone else, people will protect because there's concern. Well, if I give that up, what does that mean for me? Which is why it's equally important to figure out what are the things that are not optimized for AI. And I'd add a third category in that one, actually almost a subcategory of that. What are the things that are not optimized for AI? But also of those things, what are things that you think should be happening that are not optimized for AI that we could do if you had more time and capacity? And again, this is a strategic step that you're taking to help people understand, like, we're trying to find more high value work for you to put your time into instead of this administrative robotic stuff that is not adding value to either you or the organization. And so you can start to break these things down and you now have categories where you can start to see, hey, all right, okay, like here's the high value, high human interaction activity that we want to either continue doing or do that we aren't doing today. Now let's shift our focus. Let's shift our focus over to what are these other things that we were left on the table that are optimized for AI, things that we've decided, you know what, if we could hand this over to a machine, it actually does make sense. Want to make sure we get this other stuff so I don't feel like I'm adding less value. But yes, I agree that we can get here. Once you do that, though, there's another filter that you've got to put this through. And that is, how well is it working today? And the reason I say this is there's often an underlying assumption that AI will fix problems that are in existence. And that couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, AI will only accelerate things and make small problems bigger. And so you actually have to take the time to take a deeper look at these things that you think would be ideal for this and go, okay, but how is that working today? Because before we start deciding, well, could we bring in some sort of AI to help automate or streamline this process, you better make sure that process is actually working pretty well today. And if it's not, you need to take the time to fix the broken stuff first. Now, you may choose to fix it in a way that is incorporating AI into it. So you're not fixing something that's broken and then reevaluating it and saying, okay, well now, how do we do it with AI? You may be able to skip that step and in parallel do both. But my point is you need to actually make sure you're fixing the broken work, the things that are not working. Make sure you're actually mapping and documenting where are those things that are falling apart and aren't going well. And that's going to be an important part so that you don't end up making a bigger mess that actually creates more administrivia, more nonsense that you're either going to put your job on the line for, or you're just going to burden your teams going, hey, we're going to do some of this automation, whatever, so you can spend more time over here doing this. And then you write a check you can't cash because you ended up automating things that created more problems that is actually now sucking your team out of this higher order activity on garbage that wasn't there, but that was actually created by the technology. Now, I think that's a really important process to follow, but I think then it comes down to rubber meets the road. So you've done all this, you've done the work, you've built the trust, you've had the conversations, you've deconstructed the work, you've filtered it through these different lenses, and you're ready to go. I would just caution people in the mindset that you bring to, all right, let's do this, that you come to the table with a mindset of experimentation. This is not, we are going to crack the code and get it right on the first attempt, and it's all or nothing type of a thing. I will tell you right now, from having played with this stuff for years, some things will work and it'll be great and you will love it and you'll go, this is the best thing. We've saved so much time and it's giving us more value back. Some things won't. Some things just are not going to work well, and you need to be able to go into it and not have put all your eggs in that basket so that you're frustrated and disappointed when they don't. So again, start small and land and expand. See where you can try things out and see, hey, is this really working? If it does, then maybe we rely more on it. This is not an overnight change. This is something that you're going to do over time. I think the other thing is, going back to some of the earlier points of the vision and the building trust, this whole exercise is going to change some of those things. Your vision of how you support the organization may not change, but the way in which you do it is. And so you need to have these open lines of communication with your team and continue building trust. Because if you just have put all this effort into it and now you stop, first of all, it's just a terrible approach as a leader, because you don't build trust as some sort of like ploy to get your way. That should be something you're doing as part of your ongoing strategy. But the other piece is because, like I said, some of these things aren't going to work. You need to create an environment where people know it's okay. We don't accept failure. We expect it. And it's all right if we go into this and you go, you know what, this automation or this way we're approaching this, in theory, it sounded good. In practice, we're actually finding it's creating more of a mess. Going back to what I said before, it looked like a clean process, but now we're automating it or we're doing other things. It's actually making a really big mess for us that we're having to clean up. So people know they can bring those things up and that they can have that dialogue and can actually, say it's not working. Can we do something about it? And that requires trust. And that's something that you as a people leader are responsible for, because you hold the keys to trust for your teams. The other thing that I want to be clear on, that you should be transparent with teams up front about, is you need to be prepared and your team needs to be prepared for the fact that jobs and people's responsibilities are going to change. Like, the goal of this is not just to keep doing everything we're doing. It's actually to make a change. And if you're not clear on that, people are going to just continue to try and figure out how they fit everything back into the same box, instead of saying, well, we should be looking at a different kind of box. Like, maybe it's not a box. And that may mean what you're doing today, the job you have, may not look the same, which means you may need to be working with your HR teams on, so what do new jobs look like? Over the years, I've done lots of work with, well, this means we have to change jobs. We have to change titles, position descriptions. It may get regraded and classed. And that can be an exciting thing, but that can be a terrifying thing to people because it's change. And there's always this uncertainty of, is there a place for me on the other side of this? And, I'm getting promoted into this new role, or I'm being put into this new role. Is that what I really want? But you need to make sure people know, like, that is where things are going. And maybe we don't know where that lands, but that is part of this process, so that you can have that open dialogue and continue building that trust so people can share where they're at with it. Because the other thing you need to know is, not everyone is going to make the jump. And how you message that to people is, I would say, do it with caution, because that's not necessarily a message you want to deliver and then walk away. But realistically, when I've done major transformations in organizations and with teams, not everybody comes along for the ride. And that's not a bad thing. And I think that's one of the expectations as a leader you need to set, is that if, as we go through this transformation, this isn't where you want to go or where you want to be, that's not negative. That's not you're less than, or you're somehow not worthy of being on this team. It's a conscious decision that you have an opportunity to make, and you will be treated with dignity and respect as part of that change. Deciding that where we're going is not for you doesn't mean I don't like you or I think you're not a valuable asset. It just means your puzzle piece doesn't fit in this puzzle anymore. And so, as a leader, from my perspective, you have a responsibility and accountability to do everything you can to help with that transition, and not to just hang someone out to dry and go, well, sorry, here's where we're going. You don't like it, take it or leave it. It's one of the worst things you can do as a leader. And honestly, if that's your attitude, I would have you questioning whether being a people leader is really even the right fit for you. Because when you're making transitions, everyone is adding equal value to the team. And you just need to figure out, you know what, maybe the value that you bring to the team is no longer with this team. And so let's talk openly about that. And let's figure out where that value then can be exercised and how we bring that to this organization or maybe another organization. And that's okay. That's okay. And that's a conversation that's much longer than I'm going to include here. But I think the biggest piece with this is go into this with an experimental mindset, test some things out, have those open lines of communication, and make sure you're setting expectations that this is going to look different on the other side. And if you don't like what that looks like, that may not be, we may not change that direction, but it may mean it changes the direction of what you're doing and how you either play on this team, or if you choose not to play on the team anymore, and that you're not seen as less than for making that choice. So hopefully you found this helpful as you're starting to look at your teams and thinking through this. Hopefully, if you're an individual contributor who's watching this and thinking about this, and maybe your leader is going through some of these things, maybe it'll help you process some of these things. And hopefully this last part recognizes if your team is moving in a direction that you don't feel comfortable with or where you want to go, that's okay. That's okay. And it's okay to move on, and you aren't a failure for doing so. So with that, I hope you have a great one, and we'll figure out what the next topic is. Feel free to let me know if there are topics of interest to you, but I hope you have a great one.